Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Today, what we're going to talk about is universal design and for learning. We're going to talk about first universal design and universal design for learning. They do have some similar principles, but they are different things. We're also going to talk about the UDL framework and guidelines. We're going to go over some of those. We're going to look at accessibility accommodations versus just accessibility and UDL. So we're going to explain those and talk about some of the components of those, how they overlap and how they're different. We're going to talk about some of the challenges that we faced during the current pandemic and some of the things that we've learned for those and how that UDL might help us address those type of challenges and help the student be more successful. We're also going to talk about ways you can incorporate UDL in your class now, if you have an existing class, or from the beginning of the design process. So, what is universal design? Universal design, I have a quoted definition here, is the design and composition of an environment so that it can be accessed, understood, and used to the greatest extent possible by all people, regardless of their age, size, ability, or disability. And this is coming from the National Disability Authority. The term universal design was created by Ronald Mace, and he was born with polio, and he became frustrated with a lot of the barriers, both physical and barriers to information that was presented to him, that he incurred because of his disability. So he kind of came up with the idea of universal design and how not only buildings but all sorts of things could be accessed by more people or by as many people as possible. Mace was an architect, and he was later became the director of the Center of Universal Design at North Carolina State University. And the first parts of the concept were applied mostly to building design. So then we're going to move along to what is universal design for learning. So out of his ideas about universal design, in 1994, the Center for Applied Technology, or CAST, was created by David Ross and Ann Meyer. And CAST would apply the concepts of universal design and the framework to the curriculum reform in education. And CAST is credited for a lot of the research that's been done in the UDL field, and also the creation of Bobby, which was the first website accessibility checker. So I don't know how many of you have been around since the early days of web design, but that was one of the first tools that they could use to see if their site was accessible. So that did kind of come off of the UDL framework. The Higher Education Opportunity Act, or HOEA, in 2008 kind of gave a nod to UDL. So they recognized the potential for UDL's framework to have improvements in the learning environment and the design, and also to aid in student success. The HOEA incorporated principles of universal design and mostly gave credit to its ability to help reduce barriers to student success. And with that being said, it's not, there's nothing that's ever going to let anything be completely accessible to everyone. But the main idea behind universal design for learning is as much access to as many things as possible for as many people as possible. It's a proactive course design approach. So ideally, it starts from the beginning of your course design project, and it uses that UDL framework to build that course from the ground up. It can be applied to retrofit things or to make things better afterwards, but ideally, it starts at the beginning. So it was going to start with the end in mind. It strives to maximize classroom accessibility. So be that on the ground or be that an online, a flex type situation, it strives to maximize that for the student that they can access as much as possible, as seamlessly as possible. It considers the diverse needs and abilities of all the different people and strives to create a flexible learning environment to meet those needs. It's concerned mostly with removing barriers. So we'll talk about the differences in UDL accommodation and accessibility in a second, but that's the most important thing to know is that it is this removal of barriers. There are three principles of UDL. The first one is engagement, and it's going to be how do you motivate the learners and reduce their barriers to learners? How do you make them want to access the material, want to learn? The representation is how you present that material. So ideally in as many formats as possible so that as many people can access that and be able to use devices or because of different, we'll talk about that in a minute, because of different things they have that may prevent them from doing video or being able to hear things. We want to have the content as accessible in as many different types as possible. It also has an action, and expression. And that provides ways for the student to demonstrate what they've learned. So this would be different assignments, and we'll talk about that a little bit in a second. This is kind of a little picture that comes off of the CAS website for the UDL framework. So it's the why of learning, the what of learning, and the how of learning. We're going to get into each one of these three areas a little bit more as we go along. But here is the UDL framework broken down. So the why of learning, it stimulates and motivates, but sparks enthusiasm. And that is handled usually by various ways of accessing the material. We're going to talk a little bit more as we go along about how we can help improve this engagement. Also, the representation, provide various different types of content that can be addressed in ways that appeal to their different learning styles. And the why of learning, the action expression, offer different options for assignments and assessments. If possible, and each one of you is a subject matter expert in your own area, and you know what is required in your classes, you know what is required to prove a competency or the having the act of having learned something, you know what that is in your individual course. So this can kind of get a little creative, but give them a choice of how they can demonstrate learning. This is a really big graphic here, but it kind of goes into a lot of detail in sort of a great little infographic here. So you're seeing the access on the side over here. You're seeing engagement, representation, all of these different things kind of come down and then go across. So we're going to talk about each one of these in a little bit more detail. But all of this is available on the CAS website. This is sort of a little icon that just sort of puts it all together for you. Let's first talk about engagement. There's no single means of engagement that's going to work for all the learners. Students learn in different ways for a multitude of different reasons. Motivation and engagement to learn can be different based on an individual's neurology. So that could be they have cognitive problems, they have some sort of dyslexia, or maybe they have ADHD and just really can't concentrate or be still. Their cultural ideas, maybe they already have a predestination or a preconceived idea about what you're teaching them and what they think about it. So it may be difficult sometimes to overcome that. Also, a personal relevance to it. So why is it important to me? Why would I study this? What does it matter? And their background knowledge. So if they know a lot about the subject already, they might kind of zone out in different areas and not really pay attention. So that's important. An important thing to know about your learners is, do they have a lot of background information? So maybe you don't need to cover as much of the beginning parts of a subject as you would the more in-depth things. So that's some things to consider to help motivate and engage them. Some learners are really excited if they get to do something new. It's the greatest thing in the world. They're great from the get-go. Let's do this. And some people are absolutely terrified. They don't want to do anything new. The thought of failure scares them to death. So it's all these different mixes that you have in the group here. A lot of learners work better alone. Some would prefer to work with peers or in a group. The representation, or the way that you're going to present this content, there's no perfect fit for everybody, but learners perceive and comprehend differently. Some people will grasp information really, really quickly, and some people need it in a different format. Maybe they can grasp it just as quickly, but they need to see it. I'm very visual, so I like to see things a lot of times. And like with me, sorry, Jason, but math is not my thing. It's really not. So it's going to take me longer to get something that deals with math than it would something in English. So I'm going to have to go back over that information, and maybe it helps me to see someone work those problems or to see it visually. So people just have different different preferences for how they want to see that content. Now, one thing I will point out here is that we do have something already in place. The Read Speaker that is in each of your D2L or your eLearn, if you look in your content, if you haven't already found that, it will read aloud to them. So that helps with some of the printed text. You also have the Ally portion that has been embedded in eLearn. And Ally, once you put that content up, it's going to create different types of documents or things for them to access. So they can pull down a recording of something, or it depends on the type of file you put up, whether it's a PDF, it produces different types of alternate formats for that, but that is already in place. So that's something that we already have, that once you put it in eLearn, it's going to do that for you. Some learners are going to struggle with learning disabilities, their cultural reference, sensory problems, those type of things. It may be as simple as being colorblind. You have to be careful what you do with text and coloring, or how large something is, how small it is, whether or not you give them the ability to resize a screen, depending on what you're designing. So those are things to think about. The action and expression. There's no single option for this. It's going to work for everybody, but learners are going to be different in how they navigate the learning environment. And I'm going to share a little story here for you. My husband's brother was blown up in an explosion. He was a maintenance man, and he was going in to take care of an issue that they had found in a munitions plant up in Middle Tennessee. And he was blown up during this, and he lost an eye. He lost a good part of one of his legs, and all of his hand, except just this little part here with just the nub of the finger. So think about someone like that trying to access maybe the testing software. They're trying to do something in HonorLock where they're having to show ID and they're having to get all this stuff out and navigate this. So think about how difficult that would be for them not to have somebody to help them with this. Or you have people who can't read really quickly and they're struggling with the timing. There's all different kinds of things that we really don't consider that even in the online environment can impede the student's success. Some learners have language barriers. That's fairly common. Some have the movement restrictions like we talked about. Some have organizational difficulties, and especially in English or writing, where they struggle to put ideas together in a format that they can be presented and make sense. So they may have bits and pieces of different topics strewn all through it and really can't understand how to organize it. So those are some things too. Even with trying to access your course, it may be hard for them if there's not something laid out, some type of a course map for them to understand how to go through your course, what you expect, where the stuff is located, what am I supposed to do, where I find it, that kind of thing. And we'll talk about some things that we can do to help that in a second. A lot of people express themselves better written or by speaking or vice versa. So that's one of the things that you can think about when you're designing your assignments. Can you make those assignments have multiple options? So we're going to go ahead a little bit deeper into this. We'll talk about some ways to incorporate UDL into your courses, both from the beginning and after you've designed them in a second. But right now I want to explain the differences in accessibility, accommodation, and UDL. Accessibility usually is considered proactive, but for us, I think it's been a little proactive and a little reactive because we started, some of us were already doing this. We're already trying to make our courses accessible. We were very conscious of this in the beginning. And then we came to the point where we had the push from TBR to incorporate a lot of these things. The syllabus has to be 100% accessible. So we had to start moving toward accessibility. So for us, it's been both proactive and reactive. But accessibility ensures usually that a certain individual or group of individuals can access a specific item. It usually involves that target population and a certain piece of your content. It seeks to remove these certain types of access barriers. Access may still require assistive technology, so it kind of takes it in a piece by piece by piece standpoint, so that you're looking at each individual item. And accessibility, even in even in universal design, those accessibility ideas and processes that we follow are still very important to that because they are included in that and they are used in UDL or to make your courses universally designed. An accommodation is usually reactive and it is an individualized response for a student to meet that student's particular needs. It's going to remove the barriers for that specific student, but it's going to involve a prior knowledge. So you have to know about it before you really can do this because the students have to present this and say, hey, I need help with this, or I have this certain problem. I need, the instructor to address it. So the instructor has to take some kind of action to meet those needs. And this is usually maybe right before the course starts or maybe a couple of days into the course, you find out about this. So if a student doesn't tell you this, then you don't know about it. So an accommodation really has to be someone identifying their problem and asking for help. Universal design is proactive, and it's going to assume from the design standpoint from the beginning, ideally, that everyone needs to access everything in the course. Access is considered from the beginning. So we look at it as we're designing it to bring all of those barriers to the surface and try to mitigate as many of those as possible. And, again, each of you are subject matter experts. There are some things that are very, very difficult to make accessible. Some things I would probably think could be almost impossible, but you have to strive to find a different way to do that. So that's what this is about, is understanding what they are, identifying them, and thinking about how you can design to make this as open and accessible to students as it can be. It builds alternative ways to access and also to prove mastery. It minimizes the need for some type of accommodation because we consider this from the beginning, so it's already thought about. Now, with this, it may be possible for you to offer different types of content, but also different types of assignments. So, can they do a recording of a lecture or something that they're doing? They're going to a presentation rather that they're going to do to show that they've had mastery rather than writing that paper or rather than doing something else, maybe a PowerPoint. We're going to look now at some of the things that we've learned. And a year ago, we wouldn't have thought we could do many of the things we've done. We've done so much and we've done so well doing it. And I think everybody should pat themselves on the back because it's really been challenging for every single one of us, even if you were already very well prepared for the online environment. The challenges that our students faced, a lot of them we saw coming, some of them we didn't as much. Some of the things that I've heard about and noticed with my courses and with working with other people and students, a lot of the students took on different roles. So they may have been doing certain things before the pandemic hit, but all of a sudden everybody's at home. Their kids are being homeschooled. They're having to work different hours because maybe somebody came down with COVID or they've been shifted to a different working environment, a different shift, maybe even a different job. And they could even have sickness or COVID in their household that they're having to take care of these people, in addition to doing all these other things, worrying about being the breadwinner, all these things that they have to do just to keep their life afloat. The students also didn't always have access to technology or even high-speed internet, and they may not have been aware that we had options for them, that there were things that could be done for them. So a lot of them struggled for a period of time and kind of got behind before they really realized, okay, there's something that can be done. Maybe I can get some help. So that's one of the things that we've seen coming out of this. A lot of the students were trying to use their smartphones because that's all they had, or they bought a Chromebook and they didn't really understand exactly what a Chromebook is, that it kind of doesn't work really well sometimes with a lot of the technologies that we use, in particular some of the testing softwares. A lot of them may have had erratic work schedules. So if you required them to have attendance in a certain virtual meeting, maybe their shift got changed or somebody got sick, something happened. They couldn't always be in those meetings. So it made that really difficult, even in the flex classes, for them to be able to meet the requirements of those courses and also meet their needs for their work and for their home as well. Learning during this pandemic has highlighted existing racial gaps and other inequalities, disability, learning difficulties, all these things, socioeconomic, can't afford this, can't afford that. All these things have really come to the surface since we've been in this pandemic response mode, so that we're seeing, we kind of always knew they were there, but it was sort of like the thing in the room nobody wanted to talk about. Maybe we kind of knew it. We talked about it a little bit, and it was a concept, but to really see that play out in front of our eyes, it's been sort of awakening for us, I think, and it's highlighted the need for us to have materials in our courses that work in multiple delivery modalities, so that if we are required to shift gears, we can do that quickly and as seamlessly as possible. This benefits both the student and the instructor, because you're not backpedaling trying to catch up while you're still trying to go through all of the things you have to do to still run your course. So those are some of the things that we've found out. So UDL can help with this in terms of just the overall design process, so that if those things are made available in a digital format, if these things are made in different formats so that different people can use them, one of the things that I think helps a whole lot is to post your lesson goals and reference them during the assignment. So as you're making these course objectives, these learning objectives, what am I doing to meet this? What am I doing to first present this material? What material relates to what goal, and what assignment relates to what goal? You also can provide them a list of assignments with due dates and help them identify those learning goals. So by doing this project or this thing, you're going to learn a little bit more about this certain concept and prove that you've mastered this one, so that they know that they're doing it. And I can tell you, as a student, one of the most aggravating things for me is when I think my instructor is just merely giving me some kind of busy work. And I had a situation like that where, and I think Jessica can, she was in the same course with me, but we were told to do this big elaborate thing with our research, and sorting everything out into different spots and different components as to whether it was framework, or what it was, if it was from a peer review journal, all this work. And it took forever to do this assignment. And I had posted something in the discussion, and he's like, well, I don't really use that anyway. And I'm like, why did you make me do that? I could see absolutely no value. So for me, it was just a useless waste of my time. So that's what we want to do, is make sure they are engaged in it. And if they know why they're doing it, they're going to be more engaged and a little bit less aggravated by it if it is particularly time consuming or very detailed. Other choices for students to demonstrate their knowledge. And we talked about this a little bit earlier, but is there a way for them to do some kind of a PowerPoint? Maybe they're going to do a speech or make a video, even infographics, things like that. Is there something different that you can assign? So we're going to cover this certain concept. We're going to prove mastery of this thing or this skill. You can do a paper, you can create a PowerPoint, you can give me some kind of an infographic or something to prove this. And it's, as I said, each of you are your own subject matter experts. You know what it's going to take to prove that, and to really say that you've done due diligence in proving that they've learned these concepts. So that would be something for you to decide how you want to do that. But that is something that you can consider that will make your courses more universally designed. Share your content in a variety of ways: typed, video, audio, whatever. And if it's a very detailed bit of information, can you link out to another source or somewhere else, so that it's not all just in that one spot? It's kind of intimidating sometimes to look at that much text, but also in terms of a reader, they kind of get lost in that as they're going through it. So it's helpful to have that either broken down or somewhere else, if you can have a different link to a video or something else to give that information. Incorporate UDL into your design work. You need to give regular and relevant feedback. That feedback needs to be addressed to the student, and it needs to matter for them. Why am I doing this, and what did I do wrong? Um, a lot of times we don't have time to do a whole lot of that, and I'm sometimes lax in that as well. But one of the things that I like are the rubrics that have been designed within D2L, so that you can go out and create a rubric, and in that rubric, it's going to give that student feedback based on whatever level they scored on. All you have to do when you grade that Dropbox or that discussion is just go out and click that little box, and it's going to automatically say, well, here's what you did wrong, and here's where you should have been, or whatever you want to include in that. You can type that up. So that's something that you can include that makes your life easier and also gives them really good relevant feedback. It's also available in testing, so you can give feedback on a test answer that can be given back to that student as well, all through D2L. You could also provide a checklist or a course map. And we talked earlier about the very detailed thing where you have, the due dates and all that kind of thing. But that's a way for that student to track their progress and see what they've achieved. But more importantly, not to get overwhelmed because they see, okay, here's where I am, here's where I'm going. So they know, okay, well, next week I got to plan for this, that, or the other thing because I got to do this. So it just kind of gives them a heads up on what is coming at them and what they need to do and what they've done. You could also incorporate group work, and that's an interesting concept. Some people hate it, some people love it. But the beauty of it is you can give those, if you can find a scenario or something that would work for your discipline, you can give different roles so that each student can play out a different role that can address different strengths so that everybody has an opportunity to maybe pick, okay, I don't write very well, but I can talk, or I don't like to make speeches, but I'll write any day, or, I'm an artist, I can do this graphic part of it. So they have a chance to show their skills in the way that they want to show them and what they've learned. It's not always possible, but it's a thought, something that you can work toward doing so that the student feels more comfortable and more engaged in what they're doing. Remember that good design considers the diverse needs and ability of all, and it's going to start from the beginning. And ideally, you start with the end in mind. So you're going to take those course objectives and goals that you have from the beginning. How am I showing them what they need to know? How am I giving them this information? And what do I expect them to do with it? And why do I expect them to do that? Is it just because I've always done that, or is there an actual reason? What is aligning with my goals? So that's a very good step to take to help make your stuff UDL, is that you're not giving busy work, but the student knows why they're doing it. You can also survey students once you get into the course. How do you prefer to do your assignments? What are your needs? Is there something else that you're interested in? Maybe this particular group is a little bit more advanced than some that you've had before. Would you like me to share different things with you? And try to incorporate those answers into your lessons when you can and when you have time to do so. That will help them feel more connected with your course and more excited about learning. So that's pretty much everything I had for you today. I'm going to open the floor up for anyone who has any questions, or if you just want to share some of your experiences or some ways that you think you might use UDL in your course. This has been a really broad overview, and I know it's gone kind of quickly. So does anyone have any thoughts or questions about it?
Renee, I had a question. When you talked about accommodations, so from what I understand about accommodations is the student has to know and be able to identify that, but they also have to file paperwork within our institution to be able to access something different. Otherwise, it would be an unethical thing, right? To give them special permission and you can't offer it to everybody else.
Exactly. And that usually comes, I think, from Linda Nichols' office, and she will usually give you a detailed, you need to do this, they need X amount of time, or you do this thing or that thing. And it's usually spelled out pretty clearly for you when you have to give an accommodation. But again, they have to self-identify. That's where we may not always know. They may already have this problem. They may, I will tell you, last semester I struggled terribly in my courses because I had all the things going on here. I was teaching 2 courses. I was taking 2 very difficult courses. And in the midst of all this, my husband's ex-wife, who is my now stepchildren's mother, had cancer and died. And so I'm trying to, help them with this. And the youngest girl also started online school. So it's all of these things that were kind of piling up for me, but I never asked for anything because that's just not something that I'm not going to feel comfortable doing that. I'm not going to say, I need some time, or, I've got all these things going on. I'm just not going to ask that. And I think it's the same sometimes with a disability. It may be a thing that they just don't want to be singled out, or, my daughter has a very significant speech impairment, and it's very obvious to everybody that talks to her that she has it, but she doesn't really want to bring that to the surface because she tries to keep it, just kind of like it's there, but I don't want to talk about it, kind of thing. So yeah, it's very different, I think, for some people.
Well, and a couple things I've learned is that first off, it is more private unless it's something they have to, like for my speech class or communication class, they may have to get a smaller group of peers, which means they self-identify and invite a group, or it's an agreed upon. But from what I understand, it's an agreement between you and the student and Linda Nickel. So we come to a consensus. Then also, like in your case, if you put that paperwork into place, you never have to act on that. So on your end, if you don't need the accommodation, it's great for you. But if you self-identify and get that paperwork in place, it's there if you need it. It's not retroactive. So I tell students, go ahead and get that paperwork in place. If you never use it, awesome, that's great. But if you need it, it's in place in advance.
And I agree with you. I mean, it's so hard for some people. And I know I struggle with math. Math is not my thing. And it's so hard for people who are really good at something or gifted to realize just how hard people struggle with things sometimes. And just because you can't do something in one area does not mean that you're not going to be successful in another. So we all have different strengths and different weaknesses. So that's what UDL is about, is just being cognizant of that and trying to do what is ethical and right, and as beneficial to as many as possible.
I had one more question too, and that is, um, you mentioned the idea of giving several opportunities in one assignment on how to present that. Is there also a part of universal design that where you offer, like in my classes, I tend to offer an assignment that's presented this way and then another one that's presented. So you vary the different, so that way the outcomes or the final presentation of something looks different. So you offer multiple styles of presenting what they know. So they may not score really well on that one, but it's not going to prevent them from making a good grade overall because you've got multiple different attempts. So they may not be good at writing, but they're great at speech giving, or they love doing the PowerPoint part of it or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, UDL is just a framework. It's kind of a way of considering it. But as far as having a hard and fast rule, there's really not one. But yeah, that is, building that in score wise. Another way to do it is to cut that big project into parts. So if you have a draft situation, or maybe you have, okay, we're going to do an outline first, and we kind of do that in speech, but you're going to have an outline first, and then you're going to move on to this part of it. And then maybe you're going to do an infographic, and maybe this whole thing is like a marketing presentation where you're giving this big, huge thing, you're going to have this big, huge chunk of work in. So if you can break that down in multiple opportunities to score, that does kind of mitigate if they have problems on something within that whole entire, instead of just turning in this big huge thing and it's like worth 60 points and okay, well, you got a 30 because you missed half of this over here. So it's ways to kind of break that down and make it equitable within those assignments. Ideally, if you could offer, okay, well, here's this concept, and maybe you can do a PowerPoint, or you can write a 3-page paper, or you can do a presentation, you can do some kind of little movie like with Powtoons or something like that, cartoon kind of thing, or maybe you could do an infographic. If you could do it where they can do multiple things to prove that one assignment, the concept of that one assignment, that's great. That as well, there's multiple different ways of doing it. And like I said, you're the subject matter expert, so at the end of the day, we can give you advice on how things would work, or whether or not they would work, or this would be better than that. But you're going to know what they need to know, and once they advance to another level in your subject, what's going to be the important things for them to know. So, sometimes you have to concentrate on certain things.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else got any comments or questions?
I put one in the chat.
Okay, let me see. I am a
If you can
little
see it.
discombobulated here. I've got too many places going on. That. Maybe it's in this big long thing here.
I didn't realize that when they were taking the proctored tests in Honor Lock, and when I make up some of these quizzes and things, till I watched them on video, they were looking up the words, and that was what they were being tested on.
Yeah.
And I didn't know. I mean, if I'm telling you to spell Thursday, here are the days of the week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, blank, Friday, and they're supposed to put in the word Thursday, and then I see them in video and they're using the spell check to go and look it up because it lets them look it up in another language.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that our spell check had multiple languages in it. And so, until I watched them on the video, how do you turn that off? If that is the goal, is you must spell. I don't do it on every word because some of it's multiple choice. Which one of these is not Thursday? Monday, Friday, Saturday, Thursday. Pick out the right one. So for people that have a spelling issue, they've got multiple choices: true, false, multiple choice. Spell it, write it in a sentence. There's 5 different ways. But if I'm asking them to spell it, how do you turn that off? If that's the thing that you're checking,
So you're
must
talking
be able
about
to spell the 7 days of the week.
they're
That's
doing
just
this
an example.
within D2L.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I'm
When I
looking
had to
at that.
go with instead of pen and paper, see, I always made them come in person and take their tests, and they would take a written sheet of paper and they'd sit down and write the words with a pen and a piece of paper in the AAC. Now we have to do it all online with Respondus or Honor Lock. And I go in there when I get these red flags and I start watching videos and they're looking up the word that
I'll
they were
check
being
on
tested
that
on.
because I don't know how
I don't know how to
granular.
turn it off.
Yeah, and I don't know if I can turn it off from the administrative level. I don't know how
I mean,
granular it is, and that if it
I
will.
don't either, but I didn't realize. I knew when I created the quiz, and some of them say, "Oh, I'm only using it to put the accent marks in." They say that, okay, I use it to look it up because they don't know how to type the HTML codes or whatever, or they don't know how to insert the symbol to put the accent mark. So some of them I'll watch and see what they're doing, and maybe they're only putting in the accent on the vowel, that sort of thing. And some of them realize that, if I look up the word and it gives me the word, that is cheating.
Yeah.
But they don't think it's cheating if they let it put in the accent on the vowel for them.
Yeah.
But I've got to figure out, if my goal is to see if you can spell something like the 12 months of the 7 days of the week or whatever, I don't want the computer helping them.
Exactly. Let me look into
They're
that.
locked down. They can't look it up. They're not even supposed to have their phone out. They're not supposed to have another device out. Honor Lock is looking for all of that. And then yet in the test, it's
It's
giving
allowing
them
it.
that extra help that I didn't intend for them to have on that question.
Okay, I'll try to find the answer to that. And like I was saying, I don't know how granular it is. If I have to turn it
Okay.
off for everybody, or if I can just do
Oh,
it.
no, I wouldn't want to do that.
Yeah, let me look. Let me take a look, and if I can't find anything, I'll ask D2L and see what they recommend. But I hadn't even thought about that. That's really a good point.
Well, I didn't know it was going on until I watched the video and saw them, with their mouse. I was watching where they were going and clicking and pretty obvious.
Yeah, that is. Yeah, and it's so many things as we kind of move through this. That's what I was talking about. So many things we've discovered, and I think this has actually helped us be better. So all of the things that we've been through and all of the struggles we've had, at least we may get some good out of that, and hopefully help the students as well.
And one comment I was going to make, we've been dealing with people that have had COVID. My son now has it in Nashville. So, um, worrying about that. He self-reported that he's got it. But I'm hearing from other people too, and it affects different organs and body parts and different things. Some people have a head cold, some people have diarrhea, and some people it goes to their heart and their kidneys. But we're also hearing about people that have post-COVID short-term memory loss.
Yes, cognitive
And
issues.
that is, in fact, I have one person with a doctorate degree who has become paranoid schizophrenic from it.
Oh my
He's
goodness.
just out of his head now. He's paranoid about everything, and has very short-term memory loss. Can't remember what he just did. So we may encounter some of that, and short-term memory loss. I've had traumatic brain TBI victims from the past that had tremendous short-term memory. If they were supposed to take a test and they studied, it just didn't stick. Some of it, no matter how much they study from their brain injury. But we're
Yeah.
seeing some of that from COVID as a post-COVID long-term issue for some people, not everybody.
Yeah, it is odd how it affects everybody. And, too, I think depression comes into this. A lot of people are
Oh
dealing
yeah.
with death and sickness and just being cooped up.
Hmm.
And I know that depression does sort of dull your senses sometimes in means of how
Oh yeah.
quickly you can process things. And I can attest to that for sure, because after Charles died, I went through about a year and a half where honestly, I did not have good sense. Half the time, I really didn't. I just, I don't even know
Wow.
how I got through a lot of it. It just baffles me sometimes now when I think about it. But yeah, you think you're invincible, but you're really not. And it,
And
it
I
hits
also
all
had
of us.
students last semester that you don't know it till it's happening, but you're talking about access and whatever. When both parents or grandparents or whoever they were living with got COVID, one of my students was basically homeless. She
Hmm.
she had to keep her job. She couldn't get the COVID, and yet she was living on anybody and everybody's couch that would allow her to hang out, because she would go get the groceries and drop them off on the doorstep and take food to her parents. And she had to try to keep her job and didn't have any neighbors or any support system. I think they had moved from Jackson to Bolivar or somewhere where she didn't know anybody. And the poor girl was basically living in her car
Hmm.
and didn't really have access to her computer, her laptop. She was trying, like you said, do everything on their phone with Wi-Fi at McDonald's, and had no place to live because she couldn't go around her own parents for 2 or 3 weeks. And that's enough to get you so far behind almost that you fail just from two weeks of interruption,
Yeah.
in life is pretty serious in the middle of a semester. So
And that's,
hopefully it'll be better.
that's one of the things I've always tried to not be too lenient, but to be conscious of with my students. It's like, there's not caring and not trying, and then there's just basically dog paddling because you have everything on your back, and that's all you really can do at that point. So, I think it's a very fine line for us sometimes, what's fair to other students, but you know you can argue that point to the ends of the earth. One person has money, one person doesn't. It's all these different things, but I think as much as we can help with the access, and just do what we can do to support those people when they do have that problem. Anyone else? Well, thank all of you for joining me today. If you have any questions, or just want to reach out, and talk through something that you're contemplating, me or Jessica, either one, will be happy to help you. But I really do appreciate you coming today and spending this time with us to learn about universal design. Hope you guys have a wonderful day. See you, everybody.